What Jessica didn't know was that while she was enjoying the warmth of the house I'd secretly been paying the mortgage on for 3 years, I was standing in that storm, planning the financial devastation that would begin at 9 a.m. sharp. And the $4.2 million trust fund she thought belonged to my, quote, broke son, was about to disappear faster than her fake smile when company came over. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 72 years old. Yesterday morning, I became the most feared woman in my family's social circle. Not the kind of fear that comes from yelling or throwing tantrums. The kind that comes from quietly controlling every financial aspect of people's lives. They assume you're just a helpless widow counting pennies from Social Security. Jessica is still trying to figure out how her pathetic mother-in-law managed to freeze everything. Their bank accounts, their credit cards, their mortgage payments, their car loans, even their country club membership. So is my son David. He discovered that the inheritance he thought he'd been living off actually required his mother's approval. Every single transaction needed my signature. What they haven't figured out is simple. The woman they locked out in a thunderstorm wasn't just wet and cold, she was furious. And when a woman who controls $4.2 million gets furious, people learn quickly. Respect isn't optional, it's a requirement for financial survival. Let me tell you about the storm that changed everything. The storm where my daughter-in-law decided I was disposable. The storm that cost her everything she thought she was entitled to, simply by marrying my son. It was Tuesday, October 15th. The weather forecast had been warning about severe thunderstorms all week. Winds up to 60 miles per hour. Heavy rain. Possible flooding. The kind of storm that keeps sensible people indoors. Why? I'd been staying at David and Jessica's house for 3 days. My own house was being fumigated for termites. A routine treatment that would take a week to complete safely. Just a few days, Mom, David had assured me when he picked me up Sunday morning. Jessica's excited to have you stay with us. Jessica's excitement lasted exactly 18 hours. By Monday evening, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jessica had that look. The look she got when she felt her territory was being invaded. The look that said I was overstaying my welcome in what she considered her domain. Margaret, she said during dinner, using that tone people reserve for difficult children, I think it might be better if you stayed at a hotel for the rest of the week. A hotel? David looked confused. Mom, you don't need to stay at a hotel. This is your home too. Your home too. Those 4 words lit a fire in Jessica's eyes that I'd seen before. Actually, David, Jessica said carefully, I think your mother might be more comfortable somewhere with proper accommodations for someone her age. Someone her age. As if I were a decrepit invalid rather than a woman who'd been managing my own life successfully for 72 years. What's wrong with our accommodations? David asked. Nothing's wrong, I said quickly. I could see where this was heading. If Jessica would prefer that I stay elsewhere, I'm happy to arrange something. See? Jessica said triumphantly. Your mother understands. She knows this arrangement isn't working. But Tuesday morning brought news that changed everything. The fumigation company called to say they'd discovered additional damage. The treatment would need an extra week. Possibly 2. 2 weeks? Jessica's voice climbed an octave when David shared the news. She can't stay here for 2 more weeks. Jess, she's my mother, David said. Where else is she going to go? A hotel. An extended stay facility. Hell, maybe it's time to look into those senior living places we've talked about. Senior living places we've talked about. They'd been discussing my future living arrangements without consulting me. You've been talking about senior living places? I asked. Well, Jessica said with false sweetness, you're not getting any younger, Margaret, and this situation just proves that you need more. Structured living arrangements. Structured living arrangements. Translation. Somewhere that wasn't Jessica's house. I think I'll go for a walk, I said, standing up from the breakfast table. Clear my head and think about options. Good idea, Jessica said. Take your time. It was 2:30 p.m. when I left for my walk. The storm wasn't supposed to hit until evening. I figured I had plenty of time for a stroll through their neighborhood and back. I was wrong. By 4 p.m., the sky had turned an ominous gray-green color. The wind was picking up. I was about 2 miles from David's house when the first drops started falling. By 4:15, those drops had become a downpour. By 4:30, I was soaked through and struggling against wind that seemed determined to knock me over. I made it back to David's house at 5:10 p.m., shivering, dripping, desperate to get inside and warm up. Pray! That's when I discovered Jessica had locked the door. Pray! Not just the front door, the back door, the side gate. Even the garage door that I knew the code to had been changed. Lifty. I rang the doorbell. No answer. Lifting. I knocked. Nothing. Lifting. I could see lights on inside. I could hear the television. Jessica was definitely home. Heda. I walked around to the living room window and knocked on the glass. Jessica appeared. She looked right at me. Then she closed the curtains. Ihi. Jessica, I called out, my voice barely audible over the storm. Jessica, please let me in. No response. I tried the doorbell again, held it down for 30 seconds. Still nothing. Dayro. The rain was coming down in sheets now. Lightning was flashing every few seconds. Thunder was so loud it made my teeth rattle. Dayro. I was 72 years old, standing in a thunderstorm, locked out of my son's house by a woman who'd decided I was inconvenient. That's when my phone buzzed with a text message. From Jessica. Margaret, I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay tonight. This living arrangement clearly isn't working for anyone. David agrees that you need more appropriate accommodations. David agrees. She was speaking for my son now. I called David immediately. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted him. David, I'm locked out in the storm. Please call me. No response. I stood there for another 10 minutes, soaked to the bone, shivering violently. Lightning crackling overhead. That's when I heard Jessica's voice through the door. Margaret, she called out sweetly. I left some towels on the front porch chair. You might want to call a taxi. Or an Uber. Maybe they can take you to that nice Holiday Inn on Route 9. Some towels on the front porch chair. As if a few towels would solve the problem of being homeless in a thunderstorm. Jessica, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, please let me in. We can discuss this when the storm passes. I think we're past the discussion stage, Jessica replied. You've made it very clear that you don't respect the boundaries David and I have tried to establish. This is our home now, Margaret. Our home. And you're not welcome here during your little tantrums. Our home. Your little tantrums. Jessica, I haven't had any tantrums, I said. I've been nothing but polite and accommodating. Accommodating? Jessica laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Margaret, you've criticized my cooking, rearranged my kitchen, questioned my parenting methods with the kids, and made it clear that you think David made a mistake marrying me. I'd done none of those things. I'd complimented her cooking, I'd helped organize her kitchen when she mentioned it was cluttered. I'd offered gentle suggestions when she asked about managing her children's homework schedules. I'd never said a word against their marriage. But Jessica had interpreted every helpful gesture as criticism. Every offer of assistance as interference. Every attempt at conversation as judgment. Jessica, I said, if I've done anything to offend you, I apologize. That was never my intention. Please, just let me come inside until the storm passes. Your intentions don't matter, Jessica said through the door. What matters is that you clearly can't respect boundaries. You clearly think this is still David's house from when he was single. Well, it's not. It's our house, mine and David's, and you're not welcome here anymore. Not welcome here anymore, after 3 days of what I thought had been pleasant coexistence. Afane. I tried calling David again. Voicemail. Not welcome here at Spodzestace. David, I said into the phone, it's Mom. I'm locked out in the storm. Jessica says you agree that I should find somewhere else to stay. Please call me back. I need to know if this is really what you want. 20 minutes passed. No call back. The storm was getting worse. Lightning was striking close enough that I could smell the ozone. Thunder was continuous now. The rain was falling so hard it felt like standing under a waterfall. I was starting to feel dizzy, disoriented. The early signs of hypothermia. Haitao. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. Haitao. I stopped knocking on the door. I stopped calling Jessica's name. I stopped trying to reason with someone who'd clearly made up her mind that I was the enemy. Instead, I pulled out my phone and made a different kind of call. "Patricia," I said when my attorney answered. "It's Margaret Whitmore. I need you to prepare some documents for me. Tonight. I know it's late, but this is urgent." "Margaret?" Patricia sounded concerned. "Are you all right? You sound different." "I'm standing in a thunderstorm because my daughter-in-law has locked me out of my son's house," I said calmly. "And I've just realized that it's time to make some changes to my financial arrangements." "Oh my," Patricia said. "Margaret, are you somewhere safe?" "Not yet," I said. "But I will be soon. And so will my money." I hung up and made another call. To my banker. "William," I said when he answered his personal line. "It's Margaret Whitmore. I need you to meet me at the bank first thing tomorrow morning. There are some accounts I need to freeze immediately." "Mrs. Whitmore?" William sounded confused. "It's almost 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. Is everything all right?" "Everything is about to be much better," I said. "Can you meet me at 9 a.m. sharp?" "Of course. What accounts are we discussing?" "All of them," I said. "Every account that has David's name on it. Every trust that provides him income. Every investment that he thinks he controls. I want them frozen pending a complete review of the beneficiary arrangements." That's quite extensive, Mrs. Whitmore. Are you sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. I made one more call, to a taxi company. "I need a pickup," I said. 5847 Maple Ridge Drive. I'll be waiting under the front porch overhang." "Ma'am, we're not really running in this weather," the dispatcher said. "The roads are flooding and it's not safe." "I'll pay double," I said. "Well, let me see if I can find someone willing to make the trip." 20 minutes later, a taxi pulled up. The driver looked at me like I was insane. "Lady, you picked a hell of a night for a ride," he said as I climbed into the back seat. "You have no idea," I replied. "Where to?" "The Marriott downtown," I said. "And driver? Take your time, I want to think." As we pulled away from David's house, I looked back at the warm lights glowing in the windows. At the house where my son and his wife were presumably enjoying their dinner, while his mother sat in a taxi, soaked and shivering, having been treated like an unwanted stray dog. Jessica had made her position clear. I was not welcome in their home. I was not family. I was an inconvenience to be discarded when I became too much trouble. What Jessica didn't understand was that she'd just made the most expensive mistake of her life. Because the woman she'd locked out in a thunderstorm wasn't just a helpless widow with nowhere to go. She was a woman who'd spent 40 years building wealth that her family knew nothing about. A woman who'd been quietly paying their mortgage for 3 years. A woman who controlled trust funds they thought belonged to them. A woman who'd just decided that respect wasn't negotiable. The taxi pulled up to the Marriott at 7:15 p.m. I checked in, ordered room service, took a hot shower, put on the complimentary robe. Then I sat down with my laptop and began reviewing financial documents that would change my family's life forever. By midnight, I had a complete picture of just how much power I actually held. It was more than even I had realized. David's checking account, joint with me though he'd forgotten that detail. Paycheck-a-lag, his savings account. Also joint, set up that way when he was young and never changed. Paycheck-a-lag. 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 The house mortgage. In my name, though I'd let him believe he was the primary borrower. Mitafulsan on his car loan. Co-signed by me with superior credit. Mitafulsan on his college funds. Established and funded by me. Hufulsan on his business loan. Guaranteed by assets I owned. Pufulsan on his balls. The country club membership, paid annually by automatic transfer from my account. Their credit cards. All of them had me as the primary account holder due to my excellent credit history. Even Jessica's precious credit cards were connected to accounts I controlled. Everything they thought they owned, everything they thought they'd earned, everything they took for granted. All of it was connected to me. The woman they'd just decided was disposable controlled every aspect of their financial lives. At 1:30 a.m., I made a list of exactly what would happen at 9 a.m. the next morning. Every account that would be frozen, every automatic payment that would be stopped, every credit line that would be suspended. By 9:15 a.m., David and Jessica would discover that they couldn't buy coffee, couldn't pay for gas, couldn't access their checking account, couldn't use their credit cards. They would learn that the mortgage payment due next week wouldn't be processed, that the car payments were suspended, that the country club membership fees were declined. That's a have. They would discover that their financial lives depended entirely on the woman they'd locked out in a storm. The woman they'd treated like an unwanted burden was about to teach them a lesson about family priorities that they would never forget. I set my alarm for 8 a.m. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. But before I went to sleep, I sent one final text message to David. Son, when you wake up tomorrow morning, you'll discover that actions have consequences. The mother you allowed your wife to lock out in a thunderstorm controls every financial aspect of your life. We need to talk. Soon. I turned off the phone and went to bed. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass. But for David and Jessica, the real storm was just beginning. The alarm went off at exactly 8 a.m. I'd slept better than I had in months. There's something deeply satisfying about having a clear plan, especially when that plan involves teaching people who've forgotten basic respect exactly how dependent they really are. I ordered coffee and breakfast from room service. French toast, fresh fruit, orange juice. The kind of breakfast I never ordered when staying with David and Jessica. Jessica always made such a big deal about grocery budgets, about not wasting money on expensive food. Little did she know I'd been quietly subsidizing their grocery bills for 2 years. While I waited for breakfast, I called Patricia again. Good morning, Margaret, my attorney said. I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Are you certain you want to proceed with such drastic measures? Patricia, I said calmly, let me ask you something. If someone locked you out of your home during a dangerous thunderstorm, what would you do? Well, I'd probably. What if that someone was living in a house you were secretly paying the mortgage on, using credit cards you were ultimately responsible for, enjoying a lifestyle funded by money you'd worked 40 years to accumulate? Patricia was quiet for a moment. I see your point. I'm not being vindictive, I continued. I'm being practical. David and Jessica need to understand exactly how their life works. They've forgotten that financial independence isn't something you're entitled to. It's something you earn. The documents you requested are ready, Patricia said. But Margaret, once we file these papers, there's no going back. David's access to the trust funds will be suspended indefinitely. Jessica won't be able to use any of the credit accounts. Their mortgage payments will stop processing. Good, I said. Maybe when they're wondering how they'll pay for groceries, they'll remember that family members deserve basic respect. I hung up and called William at the bank. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, I've reviewed all the accounts you mentioned. The scope of your son's financial dependence is significant. How significant? Well, let's see. His primary checking account shows your name as joint owner. His savings account is the same. The mortgage on the house is in your name with him as co-borrower. His car loan has you as primary guarantor. The children's education funds are trusts you established and control. William paused. Mrs. Whitmore, your son's entire financial life is connected to accounts you control. If we freeze these as requested, he'll have access to approximately $300. The cash in his wallet, $300. For a man who thought he was financially independent. What about Jessica? Mrs. Whitmore, I probably shouldn't share details about another person's accounts, but since you're the primary holder on the credit cards she uses, Jessica has no independent financial resources that I can see, no savings account in her name only, no credit history separate from the accounts connected to you. No independent financial resources. Jessica had been living entirely on money I provided, while treating me like an unwanted burden. "William," I said, "I want you to understand something. I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm doing this because my family has forgotten how their life actually works. They need a reminder." "I understand, Mrs. Whitmore. What time would you like to implement these changes?" 9:15 a.m., I said. "I want to give them enough time to try their morning coffee run. Let them discover the new reality gradually." At 9 a.m. sharp, I was sitting in William's office at First National Bank. Patricia had arrived with a briefcase full of legal documents. We spent 15 minutes reviewing exactly what would happen when I signed the papers. Every joint account would require my signature for transactions over $50. Every credit card would be suspended pending account review. Every automatic payment would be canceled. Every trust fund would be frozen. David and Jessica would wake up financially helpless, unable to buy gas, unable to pay bills, unable to access money they'd been spending freely for years, money that had never actually belonged to them. "Are you ready, Mrs. Whitmore?" Patricia asked. I thought about Jessica's voice through the locked door. "This is our house now, Margaret. You're not welcome here." I thought about David not returning my calls while I stood shivering in a thunderstorm. I thought about being treated like a burden by people whose entire lifestyle I'd been secretly funding. "I'm ready," I said. I signed the papers. William entered the account freezes into the computer system. Patricia filed the legal documents that suspended David's access to the trust funds. At 9:17 a.m., David and Jessica's financial world collapsed. But to understand why this moment felt so satisfying, you need to know how I'd gotten to this point. You need to understand the woman they'd just locked out in a storm. You need to know where I came from, and how I'd built the resources they'd taken for granted. My story begins 72 years ago in a 2-bedroom apartment above Kowalski's grocery store in Milltown, Ohio. I was Margaret Rose Sullivan then, the youngest of 5 children in a family that survived on determination and very little else. My father, Patrick Sullivan, worked construction when the weather allowed and his back cooperated. My mother, Rose, took in sewing and cleaned houses for wealthy families across town. Our apartment had thin walls, drafty windows, a bathroom we shared with the family next door. I slept on a cot in the living room until I was 12. Privacy was impossible. Quiet was rare. The smell of cabbage soup and cigarette smoke seemed permanently embedded in our furniture. But even in that crowded, uncertain environment, I learned lessons that shaped everything I would accomplish later. "Margaret," my mother would say as I helped her hem dresses for customers who lived in the nice part of town, "you're different from your brothers and sisters. You notice things they don't notice. You remember things they forget." What I noticed was that some families had steady heat in winter, reliable food on the table, children who didn't wear hand-me-down clothes to school. What I remembered was every conversation I overheard about money, every argument between my parents about bills, every time we had to choose between electricity and groceries. What I understood, even as a child, was that poverty wasn't permanent unless you accepted it as permanent. Some families lived comfortably because someone in that family had refused to settle for struggle. Every Endres. My mother had dreams she'd never been able to pursue. She'd wanted to open her own dress shop before she married my father at 18. She'd wanted to travel beyond Milltown. She'd wanted to wear the beautiful clothes she spent her days mending for other women. But circumstances had trapped her. Marriage too young, 5 children by age 28. A husband whose injuries made steady work impossible. "I want something different for you, Margaret," she'd whisper while we worked together in the evenings. "I want you to have choices I never had. Suvdi nalm, I sofokwartoras aid, pasbangfrid." Their credit cards. All of them had me as the primary account holder due to my excellent credit history. Even Jessica's precious credit cards were connected to accounts I controlled. Everything they thought they owned, everything they thought they'd earned, everything they took for granted. All of it was connected to me. The woman they'd just decided was disposable controlled every aspect of their financial lives. At 1:30 a.m., I made a list of exactly what would happen at 9 a.m. the next morning. Every account that would be frozen. Every automatic payment that would be stopped. Every credit line that would be suspended. By 9:15 a.m., David and Jessica would discover that they couldn't buy coffee, couldn't pay for gas, couldn't access their checking account, couldn't use their credit cards. They would learn that the mortgage payment due next week wouldn't be processed, that the car payments were suspended, that the country club membership fees were declined. That's They would discover that their financial lives depended entirely on the woman they'd locked out in a storm. The woman they'd treated like an unwanted burden was about to teach them a lesson about family priorities that they would never forget. I set my alarm for 8 a.m. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. But before I went to sleep, I sent one final text message to David. Son, when you wake up tomorrow morning, you'll discover that actions have consequences. The mother you allowed your wife to lock out in a thunderstorm controls every financial aspect of your life. We need to talk. Soon. I turned off the phone and went to bed. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass. But for David and Jessica, the real storm was just beginning. The alarm went off at exactly 8 a.m. I'd slept better than I had in months. There's something deeply satisfying about having a clear plan. Especially when that plan involves teaching people who've forgotten basic respect exactly how dependent they really are. I ordered coffee and breakfast from room service. French toast. Fresh fruit. Orange juice. The kind of breakfast I never ordered when staying with David and Jessica. Jessica always made such a big deal about grocery budgets, about not wasting money on expensive food. Little did she know I'd been quietly subsidizing their grocery bills for 2 years. While I waited for breakfast, I called Patricia again. "Good morning, Margaret," my attorney said. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Are you certain you want to proceed with such drastic measures?" "Patricia," I said calmly, "let me ask you something. If someone locked you out of your home during a dangerous thunderstorm, what would you do?" "Well, I'd probably..." "What if that someone was living in a house you were secretly paying the mortgage on, using credit cards you were ultimately responsible for, enjoying a lifestyle funded by money you'd worked 40 years to accumulate?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I see your point. I'm not being vindictive," I continued. "I'm being practical. David and Jessica need to understand exactly how their life works. They've forgotten that financial independence isn't something you're entitled to. It's something you earn." "The documents you requested are ready," Patricia said. "But Margaret, once we file these papers, there's no going back. David's access to the trust funds will be suspended indefinitely. Jessica won't be able to use any of the credit accounts. Their mortgage payments will stop processing." "Good," I said. "Maybe when they're wondering how they'll pay for groceries, they'll remember that family members deserve basic respect." I hung up and called William at the bank. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I've reviewed all the accounts you mentioned. The scope of your son's financial dependence is significant." "How significant?" "Well, let's see. His primary checking account shows your name as joint owner. His savings account is the same. The mortgage on the house is in your name with him as co-borrower. His car loan has you as primary guarantor. The children's education funds are trusts you established and control." William paused. "Mrs. Whitmore, your son's entire financial life is connected to accounts you control. If we freeze these as requested, he'll have access to approximately $300. The cash in his wallet. $300. For a man who thought he was financially independent. What about Jessica?" Choices. That word became my obsession. I wanted to understand what created choices for some people while others seemed trapped by circumstances they couldn't control. School became my laboratory. While my siblings saw homework as another chore, I saw it as preparation for the choices I planned to create. I studied by candlelight when we couldn't pay the electric bill. I walked 6 miles to the public library every Saturday. I asked teachers questions about how successful people built their lives. Margaret Sullivan is exceptional, my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Henderson, told my mother during a conference. She has the potential for academic scholarships. She could attend college if she maintains her performance. College. The word was as foreign as saying I might become an astronaut. Nobody in our family had finished high school, but Mrs. Henderson spoke about my future with such confidence that even my mother began believing it might be possible. What would she study? My mother asked. She shows remarkable aptitude for mathematics and business concepts, Mrs. Henderson replied. She could pursue accounting or business management. Both excellent careers for young women who understand numbers. Business, numbers, mathematics. The concepts fascinated me in ways I couldn't explain. I'd always been good at stretching our household's limited resources. Figuring out how to make groceries last until payday. Calculating exactly how much my mother needed to earn each week to pay rent. Maybe those skills could translate into something bigger. Something that would create the choices my mother talked about. From that day forward, I approached my education like my life depended on it. Because it did. Academic success was my only path out of Milltown. Haselick. High school was challenging. Not because of the coursework. The academic material came easily. What was difficult was being the poor girl among classmates whose families had steady incomes. Ricli Corabio. Baji, I wore the same 4 dresses in rotation. Carefully washed and pressed each night. I brought sandwiches made with day-old bread, while other students bought hot lunches. I worked part-time jobs after school, while my classmates joined clubs and went to dances. But I also excelled academically, in ways that couldn't be ignored. Perfect grades in mathematics. Top scores on every standardized test. Teachers began mentioning college scholarships regularly. Margaret, my guidance counselor, Mr. Patterson, told me during my junior year, you should apply to several universities. Your grades qualify you for academic scholarships that could cover everything. Everything. Tuition, room, board, books. The possibility of attending college without crushing my family with debt they couldn't afford. Do esperan. I spent my senior year applying for every scholarship I could find. Academic merit awards, need-based grants, essay competitions, anything that might help pay for the education I was determined to get. In April 1969, I received the letter that changed my life forever. Ohio State University was offering me a full academic scholarship to study business administration, everything covered, plus a small stipend for personal expenses. I would be the first person in my family to attend college. And it wouldn't cost my parents a penny they didn't have. My mother cried when I showed her the letter, tears of pride and relief and hope. You did it, she whispered, holding the document like it was made of gold. You actually did it. Moving to Columbus in September 1969 was like traveling to another planet. The campus was larger than all of Milltown. My dormitory room was cleaner and more comfortable than anywhere I'd ever lived. The dining halls served food I'd never tasted. But what struck me most was the freedom. For the first time in my life, I could focus entirely on learning. No part-time jobs. No family responsibilities. No worrying about whether we could afford heat that month. The coursework was demanding but fascinating. Accounting principles, business law, economics, marketing. Every class revealed new aspects of how money and business worked in the world beyond small-town Ohio. More than academic knowledge, I was learning practical skills. How to analyze financial statements. How to evaluate business opportunities. How to think strategically about long-term financial planning. Bua assistue wantans. Ins finantor abos. During my sophomore year, I took an elective called Personal Finance and Investment Strategies. The professor, Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, was one of the few female business professors at Ohio State. She became my mentor and role model. Miss Sullivan, she told me after class one day, you have an intuitive understanding of financial concepts that's quite rare. Have you considered specializing in investment management? Investment management. I'd never heard of such a career. Dr. Morrison explained it involved helping individuals and families make smart decisions about their money. The field is still dominated by men, she said, but that's changing. Women often bring different perspectives to financial planning, more conservative approaches, more focus on long-term security rather than short-term gains. Under Dr. Morrison's guidance, I dove into advanced courses. Finance theory, investment analysis, portfolio management, Market economics. I studied how wealthy families built and preserved their resources across generations. But most importantly, I learned that building wealth wasn't about earning huge salaries. It was about making smart decisions with whatever money you had. Living below your means. Investing the difference. Thinking in terms of decades rather than months. Wealth building is a marathon, Dr. Morrison often said. People who get rich quickly usually lose it just as quickly. People who build lasting wealth do it slowly and strategically. I graduated from Ohio State in 1973 with highest honors. More importantly, I'd acquired knowledge that would allow me to create the choices my mother had dreamed about. My first job was as a junior accountant at Morrison & Associates in Cleveland. Not because I wanted to work in accounting long-term, but because they offered me a position that would provide experience while paying enough to support myself. The work was routine but educational. Preparing tax returns, managing payroll, helping small business owners understand financial planning basics. What I really learned was how little most people understood about money. Even successful business owners often made financial decisions based on emotion rather than logic. They spent money they didn't have. They failed to plan for emergencies. Most people treat money like magic, my supervisor James Morrison observed one afternoon. They expect it to multiply without effort or disappear without consequences. I began thinking about my own future more strategically. I was 25 years old, earning a modest but steady income, living in a small apartment to minimize expenses. What did I want to accomplish over the next 20 years? I made a list of goals that seemed ambitious at the time. Build an emergency fund equal to 1 year of expenses. Start investing at least 30% of my income. Save enough money to buy a house without going into significant debt. Meet someone who shared my values about financial responsibility. Create enough wealth to ensure I'd never be financially dependent on anyone. Lun Ma. Those goals guided every decision I made. I lived in tiny apartments, drove used cars, cooked my own meals, made my own clothes. I saved money that other people my age spent on entertainment and luxury items. But I wasn't miserable. I was building something. Every dollar I saved and invested was creating the independence my mother had never achieved. By 1975, I'd accumulated nearly $12,000 in savings and investments. Not a fortune, but enough to feel secure. Enough to know I was creating real choices for myself. Durfining in Traman, that's when I met Harold Whitmore. Durfidi. Harold was 3 years older than me, recently graduated from Case Western with an engineering degree. He'd taken a job with a manufacturing company in Cleveland and was looking for someone to share expenses on a small house he wanted to buy. We met through mutual friends from college. Harold was serious, responsible, and shared my belief that financial security was the foundation of a good life. He was also kind, funny, and treated me like an equal partner. Margaret, he said during one of our early conversations, I've never met a woman who understands finances the way you do. Most of the women I've dated think money management is something their husband should handle. That attitude was exactly what attracted me to Harold. He didn't assume men were naturally better with money. He didn't think wives should be excluded from financial decisions. He wanted a partner who could contribute to building something together. We started dating seriously in the spring of 1975. Within 6 months, we were discussing marriage and shared financial goals. Harold wanted to start his own engineering firm within 10 years. I wanted to continue investing until we had enough money to be completely financially independent. What do you think about this plan? Harold asked one evening, showing me calculations he'd made about our combined financial future. If we both keep working and saving aggressively, we could be millionaires by the time we're 40. Millionaires by 40. It seemed impossible, but Harold's math was solid. 2 people with good incomes, living below their means, investing consistently for 15 years, could absolutely accumulate that much wealth. Harold proposed on New Year's Eve 1975 in the living room of the small house we'd been sharing for 8 months. It wasn't the most romantic setting, but it represented something more important than romance. Partnership, shared values, commitment to building the kind of life we'd both dreamed about. Margaret, he said, getting down on one knee beside our modest Christmas tree. "You're the smartest, most capable woman I've ever met. Will you marry me and help me build the future we've been planning?" I said yes without hesitation. Not because I needed Harold to complete me, but because I'd found someone who complemented my strengths and shared my vision. We were married in June 1976, in a small ceremony at the Methodist church my family attended in Milltown. I wore a simple white dress I'd made myself. Harold wore the same suit he'd worn to his college graduation. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall, with food we'd prepared together. It wasn't elaborate or expensive, but it was perfect. Two people who valued substance over style, planning over impulse, and long-term security over short-term gratification. Our honeymoon was a long weekend at a lake cabin Harold's family owned. We couldn't afford an expensive trip, but we didn't care. We were too excited about starting our life together. When we returned, Harold and I sat down at our kitchen table and planned our future with methodical precision. "What do we want to accomplish in the next 10 years?" I asked, pulling out a notebook to record our goals. "Financial independence," Harold said immediately. "I want us to be in a position where we never have to worry about money. Our own business," I added, "something we can build together and control completely." "Children," Harold said softly. "I want to raise children who understand the value of hard work but never experience the uncertainty we both grew up with." "How many children?" I asked. "2, Harold said. "Close enough in age to be companions, but far enough apart that we can give each one individual attention." I wrote it all down. Our 5-year plan. Our 10-year plan. Our dreams for the family we wanted to create. It was the blueprint for the life that David would eventually take for granted. But that night, sitting in our small kitchen with my new husband, planning the future we would build together, I felt nothing but optimism. I was Margaret Whitmore now. A married woman with goals, plans, and a partner who respected my intelligence. I'd come so far from the little girl sleeping on a cot in a 2-bedroom apartment above a grocery store. I'd kept every promise I'd made to my mother about creating choices through education and hard work. What I didn't know was that 25 years later, the son I would raise with such love and sacrifice would allow his wife to treat me like an unwanted burden. He would stand by while she locked me out in a dangerous storm. He would discover that the mother he'd taken for granted controlled every aspect of his financial life. And he would learn that respect isn't something you can take for granted, especially from the people who love you most. But at 9:17 a.m. on that Wednesday morning, as I sat in William's office watching him freeze David's accounts, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about the lesson my son was about to learn about consequences. DI. My phone was already buzzing with messages. David was discovering that his debit card wasn't working. Jessica was finding out that her credit cards had been declined. The real storm was just beginning. My phone was buzzing constantly now, text after text from David, each one more panicked than the last. "Mom, my card isn't working." "Mom, what's happening with the accounts?" "Mom, call me immediately." "Mom, what did you do?" I turned the phone to silent and ordered another cup of coffee. David was about to learn what financial helplessness felt like. Jessica was discovering that the credit cards she'd been using so freely weren't actually hers to control. But to understand how satisfying this moment was, you need to know the rest of my story. You need to understand how I'd built the resources they'd taken for granted. How a poor girl from Milltown, Ohio became the woman who could freeze their entire financial world with a few signatures. The early years of my marriage to Harold were everything we'd planned. Two people working toward shared goals. Building something together through discipline and strategic thinking. Harold's engineering job was steady but modest. My accounting position paid enough to cover our basic expenses. Together, we were earning about $38,000 a year. Not wealthy, but comfortable enough to start implementing our financial plan. We lived in a tiny 2-bedroom house Harold had bought before we married. 800 square feet. 1 bathroom. A kitchen so small that only one person could cook at a time. But the mortgage payment was only $240 a month. We could afford it easily on our combined income. More importantly, living below our means allowed us to save aggressively. We put aside 40% of our income every month. 20% into a savings account for emergencies. 20% into investments for long-term wealth building. Margaret, Harold said one evening as we reviewed our first year's financial progress, we've saved over $11,000. That's more than most people our age have accumulated in their entire lives. $11,000. It seemed like a fortune to two people who'd grown up counting every penny. But I knew it was just the beginning. I'd been studying successful investors during my lunch breaks at work, reading books about how wealthy families built and preserved their resources, learning about compound interest, dollar-cost averaging, and diversification strategies. What I discovered was that most wealthy people weren't smarter than everyone else. They just understood principles that schools didn't teach. They lived below their means. They invested consistently. They thought in terms of decades rather than months. Harold, I said, I think we can do better than just saving money in the bank. I want to start investing in the stock market. Harold looked nervous. Margaret, that sounds risky. What if we lose everything? We won't lose everything if we're smart about it, I explained. I've been researching companies that have been growing steadily for decades. Blue-chip stocks that pay dividends. Conservative investments that grow slowly but reliably. I showed him the research I'd been doing. Companies like IBM, General Electric, and Coca-Cola. Businesses that had been profitable for generations. Stocks that provided steady returns without wild speculation. We start small, I said, maybe $500 a month. If we lose it, we can afford the loss. If it works, we'll have a foundation for real wealth. Harold agreed to try my strategy. In January 1977, we opened our first investment account, $500 invested in a diversified portfolio of established companies. By December 1977, that $500 had grown to $630, a 26% return in 1 year. Margaret, Harold said as we reviewed our investment statements, you might be onto something here. I was onto something. But I was also learning something else that would prove crucial later. I was good at making money grow. Very good at it. In 1978, we increased our monthly investments to $800. By 1979, we were investing over $1,000 every month. Our portfolio was growing faster than either of us had expected. But 1979 also brought our first major decision as a married couple. I was pregnant. Margaret, Harold said when we confirmed the pregnancy. This changes our financial planning significantly. We'll need a bigger house, childcare expenses, college savings. Maybe you should consider reducing your work hours. Reducing my work hours. The suggestion made me nervous. Not because I didn't want to spend time with our child, but because I'd seen what happened to women who became financially dependent on their husbands. Harold, I said carefully, I'd like to continue working, at least part-time. I enjoy my job, and we need both incomes to maintain our savings rate. But Margaret, raising a child is a full-time job. How can you handle both? Other women manage it, I said. I think we can figure out a way to make it work. Harold agreed to support whatever arrangement I thought was best. But I could see the assumption forming in his mind. That I would naturally become the primary caregiver. That my career would become secondary to family responsibilities. That assumption would grow stronger over the years, and it would eventually create problems I didn't anticipate. David was born in March 1980. A healthy, beautiful baby who filled our lives with joy and purpose, but also with expenses and complications we hadn't fully anticipated. Childcare costs were higher than we'd budgeted. Baby equipment was more expensive than we'd expected. Our tiny house suddenly felt impossibly cramped with a crib, high chair, and all the accessories that came with an infant. Margaret, Harold said when David was 6 months old, I think we need to reconsider our financial strategy. Maybe we should focus on immediate needs rather than long-term investing. Focus on immediate needs. I understood Harold's concern, but I also understood something he didn't. Taking care of immediate needs was important. But building long-term wealth was what would ensure our family's security. What if we compromise? I suggested. We'll reduce our investment contributions temporarily, but we won't stop completely. Maybe $400 a month instead of $1,000. Harold agreed. It seemed like a reasonable adjustment to our changed circumstances. But I also made a decision that I didn't share with Harold. I decided to find ways to increase our income rather than just reduce our savings. I would take on freelance accounting work during evenings and weekends, work that Harold might not notice or appreciate, but that would allow us to maintain our wealth-building strategy. I started small. One small business owner who needed help with quarterly tax filings. $20 for 2 hours of work. Not much, but it was additional income that could go directly into investments. Within 6 months, I had 3 regular clients. Within a year, I was earning an extra $200 a month from freelance work. Money that Harold assumed came from careful budgeting rather than additional income. I was learning something important about financial independence. Sometimes you had to build wealth quietly, without announcing your intentions or asking permission from people who might not understand your goals. By 1982, when David was 2 years old, our investment portfolio had grown to over $28,000. Combined with our savings account, we had accumulated more wealth than most couples our age possessed. But I wanted more. Much more. Belele. I'd been studying real estate investing during my lunch breaks, learning about rental properties, appreciation rates, and leverage strategies. Real estate offered opportunities that stocks couldn't provide. The ability to use borrowed money to control valuable assets. Tax advantages that could accelerate wealth building. Harold, I said one evening, I think we should consider buying a rental property. Harold looked skeptical. Margaret, we barely have enough space for ourselves. Why would we want to deal with tenants and maintenance issues? Because real estate can provide income and appreciation, I explained. If we buy a small duplex, we can live in one unit and rent the other. The rental income will help pay the mortgage. The property will appreciate over time. We'll be building equity while someone else pays for it. I'd found a duplex for sale in a decent neighborhood, $42,000. We could put down $8,000 and finance the rest. The rental unit would generate enough income to cover most of the mortgage payment. It's a lot of debt, Margaret, Harold said nervously. It's good debt, I countered. Debt that other people pay for us while we build equity in an appreciating asset. Harold agreed to look at the property. After touring it twice and reviewing the financial projections, he agreed to make an offer. We bought our first rental property in September 1982, a 2-unit building in a stable neighborhood. We lived in the larger unit, rented the smaller one for $400 a month. The rental income covered 80% of our mortgage payment. We were living almost rent-free while building equity in real estate that was appreciating at 8% annually. Margaret, Harold said 6 months after we moved in, you were right about real estate. This was a smart decision. I was right about real estate, but I was also developing an appetite for bigger opportunities, more properties, higher returns, faster wealth accumulation. In 1983, our second child was born, Rebecca Rose Whitmore. Another healthy, beautiful baby who completed our family perfectly, Gabriel's. But Rebecca's arrival also brought new financial pressures. 2 children meant higher childcare costs, more space requirements, college savings for 2 kids instead of 1. Margaret, Harold said when Rebecca was 3 months old, I think you should consider staying home full-time now. With 2 children, the childcare costs are almost as much as your salary. Staying home full-time. The suggestion terrified me, not because I didn't love my children, but because I'd seen what happened to women who gave up their financial independence completely. Harold, I said, I'd like to continue working, even if it's just part-time. I enjoy my career, and I think it's important for the children to see their mother contributing professionally. But Margaret, the numbers don't make sense. After childcare costs and taxes, you're barely breaking even. Harold was right about the immediate math. But he was wrong about the long-term implications. My job wasn't just about current income. It was about maintaining my professional skills, keeping my career options open, preserving my financial independence. More importantly, my freelance accounting work was generating income that Harold underestimated. I was now earning almost $400 a month from evening and weekend clients. Money that was going directly into investments he didn't know about. I was learning to be financially invisible, building wealth through income streams that weren't obvious or visible to my family. "I'll reduce my hours at the office," I compromised, "but I'd like to keep working at least part-time." Harold agreed, though I could see he thought I was being unnecessarily stubborn about maintaining my career. What Harold didn't understand was that I was thinking about security in ways he wasn't. What would happen if he got sick? What if he lost his job? What if our marriage didn't work out? I wanted to be prepared for possibilities that Harold assumed would never happen. I wanted to ensure that my children and I would never be financially vulnerable, regardless of circumstances. By 1984, when David was 4 and Rebecca was 1, our financial situation had improved dramatically. Our investment portfolio had grown to over $45,000. Our rental property had appreciated to $58,000. We had equity and assets that provided both security and income. Us. But I was also building something else. Something that Harold didn't know about. I'd opened a separate investment account under my maiden name. Money from my freelance accounting work that I was investing independently. Small amounts, but growing steadily through consistent contributions and smart investment choices. By the end of 1984, my secret account contained nearly $6,000. Not a fortune, but enough to prove that I could build wealth independently. Enough to know that I was creating the kind of security my mother had dreamed about. Brada. I told myself I was just being prudent, building an emergency fund in case Harold got sick or lost his job. Creating resources that could help our family if we faced unexpected challenges. But deep down, I knew I was doing something more significant. I was ensuring that I would never be completely financially dependent on anyone else, not even my husband, whom I loved and trusted. Because I'd learned something important during those early years of marriage and motherhood. Financial dependence made women vulnerable. Even in good marriages with loving husbands, women who had no independent resources were always one crisis away from helplessness. I was never going to be helpless, even if it meant building wealth that my own family didn't know about. By 1985, Harold and I had accumulated enough assets to consider our next major investment. A larger rental property that could generate more income and provide better tax advantages. "Margaret," Harold said as we reviewed potential properties, "I think we're ready to buy something more substantial. Maybe a 4-unit building that could provide enough rental income to replace one of our salaries." A 4-unit building. The idea excited me. More rental income meant more investment capital. More investment capital meant faster wealth accumulation. We found a property that met our criteria. A well-maintained building in a good neighborhood. 4 units that could generate $1,600 in monthly rental income. The asking price was $120,000. We'd need to put down $24,000, Harold calculated. That's most of our liquid savings. But the rental income would be $3,200 more than our mortgage payment, I pointed out. We'd have positive cash flow from day one. Harold agreed to make an offer. We bought the 4-unit building in July 1985. Our first major real estate investment that would provide substantial monthly income. The rental income exceeded our projections. After expenses and mortgage payments, the property generated over $400 in monthly cash flow, money that went directly into our investment accounts. "Margaret," Harold said at the end of our first year as landlords, "this real estate strategy is working better than we expected. Maybe we should consider expanding further." Expanding further. I liked the sound of that. But I also wanted to be strategic about how we grew our real estate portfolio. I'd been studying tax strategies for real estate investors, learning about depreciation deductions, 1031 exchanges, and other methods that wealthy investors use to build assets while minimizing tax obligations. "Harold," I said, "before we buy more properties, I think we should establish a formal business entity, a corporation or partnership that can provide better tax advantages and legal protection." "That sounds complicated," Harold said. "Do we really need all that paperwork for a couple of rental properties?" "We do if we're serious about building significant wealth," I replied. Successful investors don't just buy properties randomly. They structure their investments for maximum tax efficiency and legal protection. I spent weeks researching business structures and tax strategies. I consulted with attorneys and accountants who specialized in real estate investment. I learned about techniques that could accelerate our wealth building while reducing our tax obligations. In September 1985, we established Whitmore Property Management, LLC, a limited liability company that would own our rental properties and provide better tax treatment for our real estate investments. "Margaret," Harold said after we completed the paperwork, "you've become quite the businesswoman. I'm impressed with how much you've learned about complex financial strategies." I'd become quite the businesswoman. But I was also becoming something else. I was becoming financially sophisticated in ways that would prove crucial decades later. I understood business structures. I knew how to establish entities that could own assets and generate income. I could navigate legal and tax systems that most people found intimidating. Most importantly, I was learning how to build wealth through multiple income streams and investment strategies. Skills that would allow me to accumulate resources that even my own family wouldn't fully understand. By 1986, Whitmore Property Management owned 3 rental properties generating over $800 in monthly cash flow. Our personal investment portfolio had grown to over $65,000. We had built more wealth in 6 years than most people accumulated in their entire lives. But I was also building something else. My secret investment account had grown to over $12,000. Money from freelance work and careful savings that Harold didn't know about. $12,000 wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to prove that I could build wealth independently. Enough to know that I was creating real financial security for myself and my children. I was Margaret Whitmore, wife, mother, and increasingly sophisticated investor. I was building the foundation for wealth that would eventually allow me to control every aspect of my family's financial life. The same family that would one day lock me out in a thunderstorm because they assumed I was just a helpless widow with limited resources. But at 10:30 a.m. on that Wednesday morning, as my phone continued buzzing with increasingly desperate messages from David and Jessica, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was thinking about the lesson they were learning right now. Shobia khatia, palabiyama mawarachi, babiyama namau, babiyama mawaryas, shobia mawarachi, babiyama mawarya akhatia, babiyama mawarwawer. Akhatia can be very expensive mistakes. Biyama mawaryas, babiyama honor mawarya, biyama mawarya mawaryas, yama mawarya. Especially when you're wrong about someone who's been building wealth for over 40 years. David had just discovered that his debit card was declined at the coffee shop. Jessica had learned that her credit cards weren't working at the grocery store. They were about to understand that the woman they'd dismissed as a burden controlled every dollar they'd been spending freely. The education was just beginning. At 11 a.m. my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Mo. 2 minutes later, another call. This time I answered. "Mom." David's voice was strained, panicked. "What's happening? Our cards aren't working. The bank says there's a hold on our accounts." "Good morning, David," I said calmly. "How did you sleep last night?" "Mom, this isn't the time for pleasantries. Jessica can't buy groceries. I can't get gas for my car. What did you do?" "I protected my financial interests," I replied. "The same financial interests that have been supporting your lifestyle for years." "What are you talking about?" "Mom, you need to fix this immediately." "David," I said, "where was I last night during the storm?" Silence. "David, I asked you a question. Where was your mother last night when it was lightning and flooding?" "Mom, Jessica said you left after you got upset about something." "Jessica locked me out of the house, David. Your wife locked your 72-year-old mother out in a dangerous thunderstorm, and you didn't return my calls." More silence. "Mom, I didn't know. My phone was charging upstairs. I didn't see your messages until this morning." "Your phone was charging," I repeated, "while your mother stood in freezing rain being treated like an unwanted stray dog." "Mom, I'm sorry. I had no idea Jessica had locked the door. Can we talk about this? Can you come over so we can work this out?" "David," I said, "we'll talk when you understand exactly how your life actually works, when you realize who's been paying for the lifestyle you've taken for granted." I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. But to understand why this conversation felt so satisfying, you need to know how David became the man who could allow his wife to treat his mother so cruelly. You need to understand the relationship we'd once had, the dreams I'd harbored about the family we were building together. David hadn't always been the entitled, dismissive man who'd ignored my calls last night. There was a time when he was my greatest pride, my hope for the future, the son I thought would understand the values Harold and I had tried to instill. The early years with David were magical. He was a bright, curious child who seemed to inherit the best qualities from both Harold and me, Harold's analytical mind and my determination, Harold's kindness and my strategic thinking. "Margaret," Harold would say as we watched 3-year-old David build elaborate structures with his blocks, "this child is going to accomplish amazing things. Look how focused he is, how methodically he plans each step." David was focused, methodical, but he was also growing up in circumstances Harold and I hadn't experienced as children. Financial security, educational opportunities, a lifestyle that removed most of the struggles we'd faced. By 1985, when David was 5, our family's financial situation had improved dramatically. Our real estate investments were generating substantial monthly income. Our stock portfolio had grown to over $80,000. We'd moved from the tiny duplex to a 4-bedroom house in one of Cleveland's better neighborhoods, Orowatam. David started kindergarten at Riverside Elementary, a highly rated school where most families had professional careers and comfortable incomes, where children wore new clothes and brought elaborate lunches, where parents drove newer cars and took family vacations. For the first time in David's life, he was surrounded by affluence. Not extreme wealth, but the kind of steady prosperity that made life predictable and comfortable. "Mom," David said one afternoon when I picked him up from school, "why don't we have a swimming pool like Tommy's family?" A swimming pool. At 5 years old, David was already comparing our lifestyle to other families and finding it lacking. "Swimming pools are expensive to install and maintain," I explained. "We prefer to invest our money in things that grow in value over time." "But Tommy's dad says swimming pools make houses worth more money." Tommy's dad was a real estate agent who probably knew something about property values. But I also knew that swimming pools were luxury items that required significant ongoing maintenance and provided limited financial return. "David," I said, "there's a difference between spending money on things that make you look successful and investing money in things that make you actually successful." At 5 years old, David nodded like he understood, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. Why would his parents choose to be different from other families if they had the money to be similar? That confusion would grow over the years. As our wealth increased, David would struggle to understand why we didn't live like other wealthy families. Why we drove used cars when we could afford new ones. Why we took modest vacations when we could afford luxury resorts. Why his parents seemed to prioritize saving money over enjoying money. "Margaret," Harold said one evening when David was in 2nd grade, "maybe we should consider upgrading our lifestyle somewhat. We've been so focused on building wealth that we might be creating the wrong impression for David." "What kind of impression?" "That we're struggling financially, that we can't afford nice things." David's classmates come from families that live much more comfortably than we do, even though we probably have more assets than most of them. Harold had a point. Our net worth had grown to over $200,000 by 1987. We could afford a more comfortable lifestyle without compromising our long-term financial goals. But I was also concerned about creating the wrong attitudes in our children. I'd seen how quickly kids could develop entitled expectations when they grew up with luxury and privilege. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "Maybe a nicer house, better neighborhood. Let David see that his parents are successful people who've earned a comfortable life." We started looking at houses in Shaker Heights, an affluent suburb where many of Cleveland's professional families lived. Better schools, larger houses, more prestigious addresses. We found a house that met our criteria. 6 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, large yard, excellent school district. The asking price was $160,000. "It's a significant increase in our housing costs," I pointed out as we reviewed the financial implications. "But it's still only 20% of our gross income," Harold replied. "We can afford it easily, and it will provide a better environment for raising children." We bought the house in Shaker Heights in June 1987, David was 7 years old when we moved into what would become his childhood home. A beautiful, spacious house that represented our family's financial success. David loved everything about the new house. His own bedroom, a playroom in the basement, a large backyard perfect for games and activities, neighbors with children his age who became instant friends. "Mom," David said on our first weekend in the new house, "this is the best house ever. Can we get a dog now that we have a big yard?" A dog. The next logical request from a child who was discovering that his family could afford things he'd previously thought were impossible. "Jean." We got a golden retriever named Max, then a swing set for the backyard, then a basketball hoop in the driveway. Each addition seemed reasonable and affordable given our financial situation, but I was also watching David's attitudes change in subtle ways. He was becoming more confident about requesting things, more assumptive about his family's ability to provide whatever he wanted. "David," I said one evening when he asked for expensive athletic shoes like his classmates wore, "do you understand why we have more money than we used to? Because Dad got promoted?" David guessed. "Partly," I said, "but mostly because Mom and Dad have been very careful about spending and very smart about investing. We save money so we can afford the things that are truly important." "Like this house?" "Like this house. And your education. And security for our family's future." David nodded like he understood. But I could see that the concepts of saving and investing were abstract to a child who'd never experienced financial uncertainty. In 1988, when David was 8, Rebecca started kindergarten at the same excellent school. Both children were thriving academically and socially. They had friends, activities, and opportunities that Harold and I had never imagined as children. But they were also developing expectations about lifestyle and spending that concerned me. "Mom," Rebecca said one afternoon, "why don't we go on vacations like other families?" Sarah's family went to Disney World. Mark's family went to the beach for 2 weeks. "Why don't we go on vacations like other families?" Because Harold and I preferred to invest money rather than spend it on temporary experiences. Because we understood that vacation spending was money that couldn't contribute to long-term wealth building. But explaining financial priorities to children was more challenging than I'd anticipated, especially children who were surrounded by families that prioritized current enjoyment over future security. "Rebecca," I said, "we do take vacations. Remember when we went to the lake cottage last summer? That's not a real vacation. That's just staying at Uncle Jim's house. I mean, like flying on airplanes and staying in hotels and going to famous places. Real vacations. Flying on airplanes. Famous places." My 6-year-old daughter was already developing sophisticated expectations about lifestyle and entertainment. Harold and I decided to compromise. We planned a week-long trip to Florida during spring break. Not Disney World, which seemed impossibly expensive and crowded, but a modest beach vacation that would satisfy the children's desire for a real vacation experience. The Florida trip cost us nearly $3,000, more than we'd ever spent on a single week of entertainment. But the children loved every minute of it: the hotel, the restaurants, the activities, the novelty of traveling by airplane. "Mom," David said on the flight home, "can we do this every year? This was the best week ever. Can we do this every year?" David was already assuming that expensive vacations would become an annual tradition rather than a special one-time experience. "We'll see," I said. "Vacations like this are expensive. We need to budget carefully for big expenditures." But I could see that David and Rebecca had already internalized a new expectation, that their family could afford luxury experiences. That expensive entertainment was normal rather than exceptional. Over the next few years, Harold and I struggled to balance providing opportunities for our children without creating entitled attitudes about money and lifestyle. We enrolled David in piano lessons. Rebecca wanted dance classes. Both children requested expensive sports equipment. Each activity seemed reasonable individually, but collectively they represented significant ongoing expenses. "Margaret," Harold said one evening as we reviewed our monthly budget, "the children's activities are costing us almost $800 a month. That's nearly $10,000 a year. $10,000 a year for children's activities, money that could have been invested for their college educations, or our retirement security. But we also wanted David and Rebecca to have opportunities we'd never experienced as children. Music lessons, sports teams, cultural activities that would enrich their lives and expand their horizons. Maybe we can find less expensive alternatives, I suggested. Public programs instead of private lessons. Used equipment instead of new. Margaret, we can afford these expenses. Our income has grown significantly. Our investments are performing well. Maybe it's time to stop thinking like poor people. Stop thinking like poor people. Harold's comments stung because Dotwarziki revealed a fundamental difference in our feel perspectives about money and lifestyle. I didn't think we were thinking presbytor like poor people. I thought we were thinking like smart people who understood that today's spending decisions affected tomorrow's opportunities. But Harold was also right that our Kanisa financial situation had improved dramatically. Our Kanisa Surley real estate portfolio. Kanisa was now worth over $400,000. Our stock or investments had grown to nearly $150,000. Our annual head, $1,000 income from all sources. De $30,000. Kanals, jua, periform maries, $1,000. Maturitsabel, they were wealthy by Bess. Any reasonable standard. Maybe it was time to live like wealthy people rather than constantly deferring gratification for an increasingly distant future. Or own Huskay. You're right, I agreed. We can afford to provide more opportunities for the children. But I also made a decision that I didn't share with Harold. If we were going to increase our lifestyle spending, I needed to increase our wealth building to compensate. I would expand my freelance accounting practice and invest the additional income aggressively. By 1990, when David was 10 and Rebecca was 7, my secret investment account had grown to over $25,000. Money from freelance work that Harold underestimated and investment returns that he knew nothing about. $25,000 wasn't life-changing money, but it represented proof that I could build substantial wealth independently. That I was capable of generating income and making investment decisions without Harold's knowledge or involvement. More importantly, it represented security. If anything happened to Harold Jenner or our Westad, a Bulik marriage, I would have resources that could support me and the children during a transition period. But I was also learning something bad troubling about David's developing attitudes toward Habli, money and work. Mom, David said one afternoon when he was 11, why do you work so much? Other moms don't have jobs. David was comparing me to the mothers of his Horlo. Classmates, many of whom were able to focus entirely on family activities because their kaolo husbands earned substantial salaries. Ki de se tra gay. I work because I enjoy my career, I explained, and because the money I earn helps our family have a comfortable life. But Dad makes enough money for us to have a comfortable life. You could stay home and spend more time with Rebecca and me. David was developing the assumption that fathers worked to support families while mothers worked only if they chose to or needed to. That women's careers were optional rather than essential. David, I said, both parents in a family should contribute to the family's security and success. Mom's work is just as important as Dad's work. David nodded politely, but I could see he didn't really understand or agree. In his experience, the families with the most comfortable lifestyles were those where fathers had high-paying careers. In mothers focused on family management. By 1992, when David was 12, our family's financial situation had reached a level that seemed almost surreal compared to our humble beginnings. Our net worth exceeded $600,000. Our annual income from all sources was over $90,000. We owned multiple properties and had investment portfolios. Balso signed. By log mide. generated substantial passive income. Basso signed. David and Rebecca were attending excellent schools, participating in multiple activities, and enjoying opportunities that Harold and I had never imagined as children. But they were also developing attitudes about money that concerned me deeply. "Mom," Rebecca said one afternoon when Annie, she was 9, "can we get a swimming pool now? We have more money than Tommy's family, right? More money than Tommy's family." Rebecca was already thinking in terms of comparing our wealth to other families and using those comparisons to justify lifestyle purchases. "Rebecca," I said, "having money doesn't mean you should spend money on everything you want. Smart families invest their money so it grows over time. But what's the point of having money if you don't spend it on things that make you happy? What's the point of having money if you don't spend it?" My 9-year-old daughter was articulating a philosophy that was completely opposite to everything Harold and I believed about financial responsibility. I realized that despite our efforts to teach David and Rebecca about saving and investing, they were learning different lessons from their daily experiences. They were learning that their family had abundant resources, that money was available for whatever they wanted or needed, that financial security was automatic rather than earned. They were developing the attitudes of children who'd never experienced financial uncertainty, who'd never seen their parents struggle with money decisions, who'd never learned to appreciate the work required to build and maintain wealth. "Margaret," Harold said one evening after David requested money for an expensive summer camp, "I think we might have created a problem. The children assume we can afford anything they want. We had created a problem. By providing financial security and opportunities for our children, we'd also shielded them from understanding how that security was created and maintained." David and Rebecca saw the results of our financial success, but they didn't understand the sacrifices and discipline that produced those results. They experienced the benefits of wealth without learning the values that build wealth. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. "Maybe we should involve them more in family financial discussions, help them understand how we make money decisions, teach them about budgeting and investing." Harold's suggestion was reasonable, but I was skeptical about how much 12-year-old David and 9-year-old Rebecca could actually understand about complex financial concepts. More importantly, I was beginning to realize that the problem wasn't just about financial education. It was about fundamental attitudes toward work, responsibility, and entitlement. David and Rebecca were growing up assuming that comfortable lifestyles were normal rather than earned, that parents existed to provide whatever children wanted, that money was unlimited as long as you asked politely. These attitudes would shape how they treated other people, especially people they perceived as having less power or fewer resources. Like elderly mothers they assumed were financially dependent and helpless. But in 1992, I was still optimistic that David and Rebecca would mature into responsible adults who understood the value of hard work and financial discipline. I believed that time and experience would teach them the lessons that Harold and I were struggling to convey. I was wrong. By the time David was an adult with his own family, he'd learned very different lessons. He'd learned that financial resources were something he was entitled to, rather than something he needed to earn. He'd learned that his mother's contributions were less important than his father's career. He'd learned that respect was optional when dealing with people who seemed financially vulnerable. But at 11:30 a.m. on that Wednesday morning, as I sat in my hotel room ignoring David's increasingly frantic phone calls, I wasn't thinking about my failures as a parent. I was thinking about the lesson he was learning right now, the lesson that would teach him more about respect and financial reality than all my childhood lectures had accomplished. David was discovering that the mother he'd taken for granted controlled every aspect of his financial life, that the woman he'd allowed his wife to treat like a burden was actually the source of everything he thought he owned. The education I'd failed to provide during his childhood was happening right now, one decline transaction at a time, the treat lay, and it was going to be very, very expensive. At noon, I received a text from Jessica, her first direct communication since locking me out in the storm. "Margaret, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but this childish behavior needs to stop. David and I have responsibilities. We need access to our accounts immediately. Childish behavior. Our accounts. Responsibilities. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Patricia, my attorney. Evidence. I typed underneath. For the permanent trust restructuring. Permanent trust restructuring. The legal papers I'd had Patricia prepare weren't just about freezing accounts temporarily. They were about fundamentally changing who controlled the money David thought belonged to him. Forever. At 12:15 p.m., I received a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Whitmore? A woman's voice I didn't recognize. This is Sandra Mills from First National Bank. I'm calling on behalf of David Whitmore. He's asked me to contact you about resolving some account access issues. David had gone to the bank in person. He was trying to use a bank employee to pressure me into reversing the freezes. Sandra, I said calmly. I assume David is standing right there listening to this conversation? Yes, ma'am. He's quite concerned about. Sandra, please tell David that his account access will be restored when he demonstrates that he understands how to treat family members with basic respect. Until then, the freezes remain in place. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore is saying this is some kind of misunderstanding about a family disagreement. He'd like to speak with you directly to resolve. There's no misunderstanding, I interrupted. David allowed his wife to lock his 72-year-old mother out of their house during a dangerous thunderstorm. That's not a disagreement, that's a character problem. I could hear David's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. Mrs. Whitmore, Sandra continued, Mr. Whitmore is saying his wife didn't mean any harm. That you left voluntarily after an argument. Sandra, would you voluntarily leave a house during lightning and flooding? Would any reasonable person choose to stand outside in a thunderstorm? Silence. Mrs. Whitmore, what would it take to resolve this situation? A genuine apology from both David and Jessica, acknowledgement that their behavior was unacceptable, and a signed agreement that I will be treated with respect in the future. That sounds reasonable, Sandra said. Mr. Whitmore is nodding. He says he can agree to those terms. Wonderful, I said. Have David call me when he's ready to have that conversation. I hung up. 2 minutes later, David called. Mom, he said, his voice carefully controlled. I want to apologize for last night. Jessica and I both realize we handled the situation poorly. What situation, David? The disagreement about your staying with us. What disagreement? I was staying in your guest room while my house was being fumigated. What was there to disagree about? Mom, Jessica felt like you were being critical of how she manages the household. David, in 3 days, I complimented Jessica's cooking, helped organize her cluttered kitchen when she mentioned it was disorganized, and offered gentle suggestions when she asked about homework schedules for the children. Which of those actions was inappropriate? Silence. David, are you telling me that offering help when asked is grounds for being locked out in a storm? No, Mom. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? I'm saying Jessica misunderstood your intentions. She thought you were criticizing her instead of helping her. And what do you think, David? Another pause. I think Jessica overreacted. I think locking you out was wrong. I'm sorry it happened. You think Jessica overreacted. Not Jessica was completely wrong. Not I should have protected my mother. Jessica overreacted. David, I said, put Jessica on the phone. Mom, she's not here right now. David, don't lie to me. I can hear her voice in the background. Put your wife on the phone. Rustling sounds. Muffled conversation. Then Jessica's voice. Margaret. Her tone was ice cold. No greeting. No pleasantries. Jessica, I replied, matching her tone exactly. I understand you'd like your credit cards to work again. This is ridiculous, Margaret. You're acting like a child who didn't get her way. A child who didn't get her way. I was a child because I objected to being locked out in a thunderstorm. Jessica, I said calmly, explain to me why you locked me out of the house last night. I didn't lock you out. You left after throwing a tantrum about staying in a hotel. A tantrum about staying in a hotel. Jessica was rewriting history to make herself the reasonable party. Jessica, I went for a walk at 2:30 in the afternoon. When I returned at 5:10, soaking wet from the storm, you had locked all the doors and refused to let me in. You were gone for hours without telling anyone where you were going. We didn't know if you were coming back. So you changed the garage door code and locked every entrance to the house? Margaret, this is our home. We have the right to secure our property however we choose. Our home. Secure our property. Jessica was claiming ownership of a house I'd been secretly paying the mortgage on for 3 years. Jessica, I said, do you know who actually owns that house? David and I own the house. We bought it together 3 years ago. Check your mortgage documents, Jessica. Check whose name is on the deed. Check who's been making the monthly payments. Silence. Jessica, the house you think you own is actually owned by a trust I established. The mortgage payments you think David has been making have been coming from my accounts. You've been living in my house while treating me like an unwelcome guest. That's impossible, Jessica said, but her voice had lost its confidence. David, are you listening to this conversation? Yes, Mom. David, did you know that the mortgage payments for your house have been coming from my accounts? What? No, Mom, I've been making those payments myself. Check your bank statements, David. Check where the monthly auto transfers have been coming from. Check whose accounts have been funding your lifestyle for the past 3 years. More silence. Mom, David said slowly, are you saying you've been paying our mortgage? I'm saying you've been living on money I provided while assuming you were financially independent. Jessica has been using credit cards that I'm ultimately responsible for while treating me like a burden. But I thought... You thought what, David? We thought you were struggling financially, living on Social Security and Dad's small life insurance policy. What made you think that? Because you never spend money on nice things. You drive an old car. You live in a modest house. You never take expensive vacations. I drive an old car because I prefer to invest money rather than spend it on depreciating assets. I live in a modest house because I don't need to impress anyone with my residence. I don't take expensive vacations because I'd rather build wealth than spend it on temporary experiences. David, I said, did it ever occur to you that I might be living below my means by choice rather than necessity? No, David admitted. We assumed you needed our help and support as you got older. You assumed I needed your help while I was actually providing your support. The irony was perfect. David and Jessica had been planning to manage their helpless mother while living entirely on money she provided. They'd been treating me like a financial burden while being completely financially dependent on me. Mom, David said, we didn't know. If you'd told us about your financial situation, if I'd told you that I had money, what would have changed? We would have treated you differently. You would have treated me with respect only if you knew I had money. David realized his mistake immediately. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, David. You treated me like a burden because you thought I was poor. You would have treated me better if you'd known I was wealthy. Mom, that's not fair. What's not fair is a 72-year-old woman being locked out in a thunderstorm by people whose entire lifestyle she's been funding. Jessica's voice came back on the line. Margaret, we're willing to apologize. We made mistakes. Can we move past this and restore our account access? Jessica, I said, what specific mistakes did you make? We should have communicated better about expectations during your visit. Communicated better about expectations. She was still avoiding responsibility for locking me out in a storm. Jessica, what specifically are you apologizing for? I'm apologizing for the misunderstanding that led to you feeling unwelcome. A misunderstanding that led to me feeling unwelcome. Not, I'm sorry I locked you out. Not, I'm sorry I was cruel and disrespectful. A misunderstanding. Jessica, I said, that's not an apology. That's a deflection. What do you want me to say, Margaret? I want you to acknowledge that you deliberately locked me out of the house during a dangerous storm. I want you to admit that your behavior was cruel and unacceptable. Fine, Jessica said through gritted teeth. I locked you out. I'm sorry. Fine, I locked you out. The most grudging, insincere apology I'd ever heard. Jessica, I said, do you understand why your behavior was wrong? Because it was rude? Because it was dangerous. Because it was cruel. Because it showed complete disrespect for someone who's been supporting your family financially for years. Margaret, we didn't know about the financial support. You didn't know. But you should have shown respect anyway. Family members deserve basic human decency regardless of their financial status. You're right, Jessica said, but her tone suggested she was saying what she thought I wanted to hear, rather than expressing genuine remorse. David, I said, are you satisfied with Jessica's apology? Mom, Jessica is trying to make this right. Can't we put this behind us and move forward? Put this behind us and move forward. David wanted to return to normal without addressing the fundamental problems that created this situation. David, I said, what guarantee do I have that this won't happen again? It won't happen again, Mom. We've learned our lesson. What lesson have you learned? That we need to treat you with more respect. Why do you need to treat me with more respect? Because you're family. Because you deserve it. Do you deserve respect only because you have money? No, of course not. Then why are you promising to treat me better only after discovering that I have money? David couldn't answer that question because it revealed the truth about his character. He was willing to show respect to people who had power or resources. But he'd learned to dismiss people he perceived as weak or dependent. Like elderly mothers he assumed were financially helpless. Mom, David said finally, what do you want from us? I want you to understand that respect isn't conditional on financial status. I want you to realize that your lifestyle has been funded by someone you treated like a burden. I want you to acknowledge that your assumptions about my capabilities and resources were completely wrong. We acknowledge all of that, David said. Can we restore the account access now? David, I said, the account freezes aren't punishment, they're education. You need to understand how your life actually works before you can be trusted to manage it responsibly. What does that mean? It means you're going to learn to live within your actual means instead of the means I've been providing. It means you're going to understand the difference between earning money and being given money. Mom, we have bills to pay. The kids need things. We can't just stop functioning financially. You can function financially, David. You have jobs. You have income. You just need to learn to live on what you actually earn instead of what you've been spending. But the mortgage payment will be handled appropriately, but not by automatic transfers from accounts you don't control. Mom, are you saying you're going to stop helping us financially? I'm saying I'm going to stop enabling you financially. There's a difference. What's the difference? Helping means providing support when you need it. Enabling means providing support that prevents you from learning to be independent. David was quiet for a long moment. Mom, he said finally, how long have you been planning this? Planning what? This financial control. This punishment. David, I wasn't planning anything until Jessica locked me out last night. I was content to let you live on money I provided while believing you were financially independent. But when you showed me that you could treat me like a disposable burden, I realized you needed to learn some lessons about reality. So this is permanent? The account restrictions will be lifted when you demonstrate that you understand how to treat people with respect. When you show that you can manage money responsibly. When you prove that you've learned the difference between being entitled to something and earning something. How do we prove that? You start by living within your actual income for 6 months. You pay your own bills with money you earn from your jobs. You treat me with the respect you'd show to someone whose financial support you depend on. 6 months? Jessica's voice was shrill. We can't survive 6 months without access to credit cards and trust funds. Jessica, I said, millions of families survive without trust funds and premium credit cards. You'll figure it out. But our mortgage payment is $1,500 a month. Our car payments are $800. The kids' activities cost $600. We need more money than our salaries provide. Jessica had just outlined exactly why they needed to learn financial reality. Their expenses exceeded their income because they'd been living on money I provided rather than money they earned. Jessica, I said, those are choices you made based on resources you thought you had. Now you need to make different choices based on resources you actually have. You want us to sell our house? I want you to make decisions like adults who are responsible for their own financial security. Margaret, you're being cruel. Jessica, I'm being educational. Cruel would be continuing to enable your financial irresponsibility while you treat me like a burden. Mom, David said, what if we agree to treat you better? What if we sign some kind of agreement about respect and family relationships? David, respect isn't something you sign an agreement about. It's something you demonstrate through consistent behavior over time. So there's nothing we can do to fix this immediately? You can start by living like adults who are responsible for their own lives instead of children who expect their parents to solve their problems. I hung up. At 1 p.m., I called Patricia. How did the conversation go? She asked. Exactly as expected. They want the benefits restored immediately without making any real changes to their attitudes or behavior. Are you ready to proceed with the permanent trust restructuring? I'm ready. File the papers that remove David as primary beneficiary. Transfer control to the charitable foundation we discussed. Margaret. That's a significant decision. Once we file these documents, David's access to the trust funds will be permanently limited. Patricia. David had 43 years to learn how to treat his mother with respect. Jessica had 10 years of marriage to learn basic human decency. They've had enough time to demonstrate their character. What about the house? The house will be transferred to Rebecca. She can decide whether to let David and Jessica continue living there or find other arrangements. And Rebecca doesn't know about any of this? Rebecca is about to learn that actions have consequences. That the grandmother she's been taking for granted controls resources that could change her life. When would you like to implement these changes? Today. I want the new trust structure in place before David and Jessica figure out how to manipulate their way back into my good graces. It will be done by 5 p.m. At 2 p.m., I received a call from Rebecca. Grandma Margaret. Rebecca's voice was tentative. Dad called me. He said there's some kind of problem with bank accounts. Hello, Rebecca. How are you doing, sweetheart? I'm confused, Grandma. Dad says you froze their credit cards because of an argument with Jessica. Rebecca, did your father tell you what the argument was about? He said Jessica felt like you were being critical during your visit. Rebecca, your father's wife locked me out of their house during a thunderstorm last night. I stood in freezing rain and lightning for over an hour while she refused to let me back inside. Oh my God, Grandma, are you okay? I'm fine now, sweetheart. But I learned something important about how your father and his wife view their family responsibilities. Grandma, that's horrible. I had no idea. Rebecca, did you know that I've been paying your father's mortgage for the past 3 years? What? No, Dad said he and Jessica bought that house together. They live in that house, but I own it. I've been covering their mortgage payments, their credit card bills, and most of their living expenses, while they assumed I was struggling financially. Grandma, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us you had money? Because I wanted to see how my family would treat me when they thought I was vulnerable and dependent. And what did you learn? I learned that your father would allow his wife to treat his mother cruelly when he thought I had no power to defend myself. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Grandma, she said finally, what's going to happen now? That depends on what kind of person you are, Rebecca. Are you like your father, who shows respect only to people he thinks have power? Or are you someone who understands that family members deserve basic human decency regardless of their financial status? Grandma, I've always tried to treat you well. You have, sweetheart. You've been kind and respectful even when you thought I was just a lonely widow with limited resources. So what does this mean for me? It means you're about to inherit a house in Shaker Heights. It means you'll have access to educational funds that can pay for graduate school or professional training. It means you'll have opportunities your father took for granted. What about Dad and Jessica? They'll have the opportunity to learn how to live within their actual means instead of money I provide. Grandma, will you ever forgive them? Rebecca, forgiveness isn't the issue. Trust is the issue. Your father showed me that he can't be trusted to treat vulnerable family members with respect. Jessica showed me that she views me as a burden rather than a person. Maybe they'll change. Maybe they will. But I'm 72 years old, Rebecca. I don't have time to wait for people to become better human beings. I have time to enjoy relationships with people who already understand how to treat others with kindness and respect. Like me? Like you, sweetheart. You're going to do very well in life. At 5 p.m., Patricia called to confirm that all legal documents had been filed. David's access to trust funds was permanently restricted. The house had been transferred to Rebecca. Control of the family's financial resources had been moved to a charitable foundation that would provide Rebecca with educational support while ensuring David and Jessica could no longer take advantage of my generosity. At 6 p.m., I checked out of the Marriott and drove to the small house I'd purchased 6 months earlier in a quiet neighborhood 30 minutes from David's house. A house I'd bought with cash under Rebecca's name. A house where I could live comfortably while remaining close enough to maintain a relationship with my granddaughter. A house that David and Jessica didn't know existed. As I unlocked the door to my new home, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, the bank says our accounts have been permanently closed. What's happening?" I turned off the phone without responding. David and Jessica were about to learn that some lessons are permanent, that some mistakes have consequences that can't be undone with apologies or promises to do better. They were about to discover that the woman they'd treated like a disposable burden had been the source of everything they thought they owned. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 72 years old. Yesterday, I became the most feared woman in my family's social circle. Not because I'm cruel or vindictive. Because I understand that respect isn't optional in relationships. Because I know the difference between being loved and being tolerated. Because I proved that assumptions about other people's capabilities can be very expensive mistakes. David and Jessica are struggling to pay their bills with their actual salaries. They're learning to live without the financial support they never appreciated. They're discovering what financial independence really means when you have to earn it yourself. Meanwhile, Rebecca is thriving. She's using her inheritance wisely, treating her grandmother with the respect and kindness that should never have been conditional on financial status. Sometimes the best lessons are the most expensive ones. Sometimes people need to lose everything they take for granted before they learn to appreciate what they had. And sometimes a 72-year-old woman who's been locked out in a storm is exactly the person to teach that lesson. David thought he knew his mother. Jessica thought she could treat me like a burden. They were both wrong about everything. Go Suring. The woman they dismissed controls more wealth than they'll ever see. The woman they locked out in a storm is living comfortably, while they struggle with problems money could solve. If they'd shown basic human decency, they could have had everything. Instead, they have exactly what they earned through their own character and choices. Nothing more. Nothing less. And I've never been happier. 1 year later, I'm sitting in my sunroom watching Rebecca tend to the garden we planted together. She's 25 now. Beautiful, intelligent, and kind. Everything I hoped she would become when she was a little girl asking innocent questions about money and family. "Grandma," she says, wiping dirt from her hands, "I got the acceptance letter from law school today." "Congratulations, sweetheart. Yale, wasn't it?" "Yes. Full scholarship plus living expenses. Thanks to the educational fund you set up." Rebecca doesn't take anything for granted. She works hard. She earns her opportunities. She treats people with respect regardless of their circumstances. Full skam till. She's everything her father should have been. Full skam till skam, uppal skam till. My phone buzzes, a text from David. His first communication in 6 months. "Mom, I wanted you to know that Jessica and I are getting divorced. The financial stress was too much for our marriage. I know you probably don't care, but I thought you should know." I show the message to Rebecca. "Are you going to respond?" she asks. "Should I?" "That's up to you, Grandma, but I think he's finally starting to understand what he lost." What he lost. David lost more than money when he allowed Jessica to lock me out in that storm. He lost his mother. He lost his inheritance. He lost the respect of his own daughter. But he lost. Most importantly, he lost the opportunity to have a relationship with someone who would have done anything for him if he'd just shown basic human decency. I type back, "I'm sorry your marriage didn't work out. I hope you've learned something from this experience." 3 dots appear, then disappear, then appear again. Finally, "I have, Mom. I've learned that I was wrong about everything. Wrong about everything." It took losing his house, his lifestyle, and his marriage for David to reach that conclusion. Rebecca sits down beside me. "What do you think he means?" "I think he means he understands that respect isn't something you give only to people who have power over you. That family members deserve kindness even when you think they're vulnerable." "Do you think he's really changed?" "I think he's learned an expensive lesson. Whether that changes his character permanently remains to be seen. Rebecca nods. Are you going to give him another chance? Rebecca, I'm 73 years old. I don't have unlimited time to wait for people to become better human beings. I'd rather spend my remaining years with people who already understand how to treat others with love and respect. Like me? Like you, sweetheart. I get another text. This one from an unknown number. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Jessica. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to apologize for my behavior last year. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I hope someday you can forgive me. I show this to Rebecca as well. That's more sincere than her first apology, Rebecca observes. It's easier to be sincere when you're facing the consequences of your actions. Are you going to respond? No. Jessica had years to learn how to treat me with respect. She chose cruelty instead. Now she's learning what that choice cost her. I delete the message. Rebecca and I spend the afternoon working in the garden. Planting flowers that will bloom next spring. Creating beauty that will last longer than the relationships that disappointed me. At dinner, Rebecca tells me about her job at the environmental law firm. The cases she's working on. The difference she's making in the world. I love that you're using your talents to help people, I tell her. You taught me that having advantages means you have responsibilities to others. Your father had advantages too. He chose to use them differently. Grandma, do you ever regret what you did? Which part? Cutting Dad and Jessica off financially. Making them face reality so harshly. I consider the question carefully. Rebecca, do you think I should have continued supporting people who treated me like a burden? No. Do you think I should have enabled their entitled attitudes indefinitely? No. Do you think David learned more from losing everything than he ever learned from having everything handed to him? Definitely. Then I have no regrets. Some lessons can only be learned through consequences. After dinner, I get a call from Patricia. Margaret, I have some news you might find interesting. David applied for a loan modification on his apartment rental. He listed his income as $32,000 a year. That's significantly less than what he was spending when I was supporting him. He's learned to live within his actual means. He drives a used car now, shops at discount stores, has a small apartment in a modest neighborhood. How's he handling the adjustment? From what I can tell, he's working harder than he ever has. He got a second job to make ends meet. He's learned what financial independence actually requires. And Jessica? Jessica moved back in with her parents. She's working part-time at a clothing store. No more credit cards. No more expensive lifestyle. Do you think they've learned their lesson? I think they've learned that actions have consequences. Whether they've learned to be better people is a different question. I hang up and think about David's transformation. From entitled man-child to someone who works 2 jobs to pay his bills. From someone who took his mother's support for granted to someone who understands what earning money actually means. Bedel des butter. It's the education I should have given him 30 years ago. The next morning, I receive a handwritten letter. David's handwriting. No return address. Mom, I know you probably won't read this, but I needed to write it anyway. I've had a year to think about what happened, to understand what I lost and why I lost it. You're right that I would have treated you differently if I'd known you had money. That's the most shameful thing I've ever realized about myself. I should have treated you with respect because you're my mother. Because you raised me with love and sacrifice. Because you deserved basic human decency, regardless of your financial situation. I failed you as a son. I failed Rebecca as a father. I failed myself as a human being. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand that respect isn't conditional. That family means protecting the people you love, not using them. That having money doesn't make you valuable. Treating people with kindness makes you valuable. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to learn what you tried to teach me my whole life. I love you, Mom. I always have. I just forgot how to show it. David. I read the letter twice. Then I show it to Rebecca. That's the most honest thing Dad's ever written, she says. It is. But it's also too late. Is it, Grandma? People can change. Maybe he really has learned. Rebecca, your father had 43 years to learn these lessons. He chose not to learn them until the consequences forced him to. That tells me more about his character than any letter can change. But what if he's really different now? Then he'll live his life differently. He'll treat other people with respect. He'll be a better human being. But he'll do it without access to my resources or my relationship. Rebecca nods slowly. You're protecting yourself. I'm protecting my peace of mind. I'm protecting my remaining years from people who've proven they can't be trusted to treat me with basic respect. And you're protecting me? I'm ensuring that you inherit resources from someone who values character over convenience, someone who understands that money is a tool for helping people, not enabling bad behavior. That evening, I make a decision. I write a letter to David. Son, I received your letter. I believe you've learned important lessons from the consequences of your actions. I'm glad you understand that respect isn't conditional on financial status. I hope you apply these lessons to all your relationships going forward. However, understanding what you did wrong doesn't undo the damage you caused. Trust, once broken, is extremely difficult to rebuild. I'm 73 years old. I don't have unlimited time to wait for people to prove they've changed. I'd rather spend my remaining years with people who already understand how to treat others with love and respect. I wish you well in your new life. I hope you find happiness through your own efforts and choices. But I won't be part of your journey toward becoming a better person. That's work you need to do independently. Take care of yourself, Mom. I seal the letter and give it to Rebecca to mail. Are you sure about this? She asks. I'm sure. Your father made his choices when he thought I was powerless. Now I'm making mine when I know I have power. And you're choosing me? I'm choosing people who choose me. People who showed me kindness when they thought I had nothing to offer in return. Rebecca hugs me. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart. You're gonna do amazing things with your life. 6 months later, I get news that David has been promoted at his job. He's working as an accountant at a small firm, earning an honest living through his own effort. Living within his means. I'm proud of him for learning these lessons. But I'm not tempted to restore our relationship, Enai. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Some lessons, once learned the hard way, need to stay learned. Rebecca graduates from law school at the top of her class. She accepts a position at a prestigious firm in Boston. She uses her signing bonus to establish a scholarship fund for low-income students. I want to help people who remind me of you, Grandma, she tells me. People who understand that opportunities are precious because they're earned, not given. I couldn't be prouder. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I'm 74 years old. 2 years ago, I became the most feared woman in my family's social circle. Today, I'm the most satisfied woman in my family's social circle. I live in a beautiful house with someone who loves and respects me. I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. I have the peace of mind that comes from eliminating toxic people from my life. Most importantly, I have the satisfaction of knowing that I taught important lessons to people who needed to learn them. David learned that respect isn't conditional on financial status. Jessica learned that cruelty has consequences. Rebecca learned that character matters more than blood relations. The woman they locked out in a thunderstorm proved that underestimating people can be the most expensive mistake you ever make. The woman they treated like a burden showed them what real power looks like. And the woman they thought was helpless demonstrated that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own choices. I didn't just survive being locked out in a storm. I thrived. And I'm living proof that it's never too late to choose respect over relationships that don't serve you. Sometimes the best revenge is living so well that the people who wronged you realize exactly what they lost through their own poor choices. David and Jessica lost everything because they forgot that respect isn't optional. I gained everything because I remembered that I deserve better. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.